So yes, the question about how can trade unions best implement the guidance at company or sector level and integrate a gender-responsive approach into collective bargaining is really crucial. Trade unions have a really important role to play in implementing the guidance at company and sectoral level. It's really beneficial if there's a sectoral approach, because it's at the sectoral level that this can set a standard of what women workers can expect across all workplaces, including obligations on employers to ensure a working environment free from gender-based violence right across the sector. But this also needs to be implemented at workplace and company level. And indeed, if there's not a sectoral bargaining approach, which is the case in some countries, it needs to be implemented at company and workplace level. A gender-responsive approach will really benefit from both women's involvement and participation in collective bargaining, and also that there's training and guidance for collective bargaining teams in ensuring a gender-responsive approach. First of all, every company and every workplace should be covered with a comprehensive policy that has been negotiated and agreed between the union and the employer. Now, this policy could be a standalone workplace policy on gender-based violence and harassment with a specific focus on violence against women. It could be that gender-based violence is integrated into an overall policy looking at all forms of workplace violence and harassment and bullying against women and men in the world of work. Or it could be used, and the guidance could be used as a basis for checking whether your existing company policy or workplace policy is fit for practice. Does it include all forms of violence and harassment faced by all groups of women working in transport, including an intersectional approach? So that's the first important part of it. The second important part of it is to ensure that there is a gender-responsive risk assessment, and that this leads to gender-responsive prevention measures in the workplace. The guidance can be adapted. It can be looked at and implemented in relation to your specific sector. There may be different situations facing women working in shipping routes compared to, say, women working on bus routes or in transport, rail transport. There may be different situations arising for women in customer-facing services, in ticket offices or in ticket collections. So it's important to adapt it to your sector or jobs and your specific country context. It's important to use the guidance for training and awareness raising. This could be a good basis for discussing what currently exists in the workplace, and indeed any good practices that currently exist, and what needs to change. A further way to use the guidance is to organise and recruit women workers by involving them in consultations about gender-based violence at work, helping women to identify situations in the workplace and organising around that. Ensure a gender-responsive approach at each stage of collective bargaining. So this means in your preparation for collective bargaining, build capacity, knowledge, and expertise in your preparations. Ensure that collective bargaining teams are well prepared and informed. They have access to data and strong arguments about why it's crucial to both prevent and address all forms of violence and harassment. It's important when formulating your claims for collective bargaining to ensure that they are gender responsive. Check this out with your occupational safety and health teams, with your women's committee, and so on. Ensure that you carry out a gender impact assessment of any existing agreements, particularly if they're being renegotiated. Find out if there are gaps or issues that need to be addressed, and make sure that when you're extending the scope of agreements or the content of agreements, make sure that they are gender responsive. And there's checklists that you can use to help you check against this. Ensure that negotiations also include provisions on implementing, monitoring and reviewing the impact of agreement through a joint process. A really important issue is to ensure that your union rules and structures also ensure that women are represented in internal decision-making, policies, in building women's leadership and decision-making, but also that you find ways to address structural inequalities such as occupational segregation, the issues of working in a male-dominated sector, women's disproportionate share of unpaid care work, unequal gender roles and relations, and so on, that contribute to gender inequalities in the workplace and to a culture of violence and harassment. And use the guidance for the model workplace policy and the risk assessments to inform the focus, the content of your bargaining and negotiations.